The patient arrived on a Tuesday with no acute symptoms and a file that said he was dying. Not the file exactly. The file said what files always say, which is the measurable things in the measured language of medical documentation. Vitals and blood work and scan results in the specific clinical language that describes the body's condition, without always describing the person's condition, which are sometimes the same thing and sometimes not. The vitals were normal. The blood work was unremarkable. The scans showed nothing that should have been causing what the referring physician had described as a progressive and unresponsive decline over 9 months. The patient was a human named Leo Vasquez, 51 years old, former Outer Belt survey pilot, 11 years retired. He had come to me because 3 previous physicians across 2 systems had found nothing, and because the Coalition Medical Authority had a policy of escalating unexplained cases to specialists with the appropriate cross-species diagnostic experience. I was that specialist. My name is Dr. Vale Oren, and I want to be honest about something before I tell you what happened. I am considered very good at my job, not in the modest way that people who are very good at their jobs often describe themselves. I am considered very good at my job in the specific way that my field recognizes, with the publications and the case outcomes and the referral volume that are the field's way of saying, this person has solved the problems that other people could not solve. I had not encountered a case I could not solve in 7 years. Leo Vasquez sat across from me in my examination room and answered my questions with the patience of someone who had answered the same questions 3 times before and had arrived at a place of genuine equanimity about the process. Not defeat exactly, more the specific calm of someone who had accepted that the answers might not come and was still showing up because showing up was the available option. I asked the standard questions first: sleep, appetite, pain scale, energy levels, social contact, physical activity, all the measurable behavioral indicators that often pointed to what the biological indicators did not. The answers were consistent with the decline the file described and inconsistent with every biological cause the scans had ruled out. I asked less standard questions. When did you last feel well? Not healthy. Well, he thought about it. He said approximately 9 months ago, he said, before he retired from the consulting work he had been doing since leaving the survey service. I noted that. What was the consulting work? Navigation consulting for Outer Belt survey operations. He had been using his 11 years of survey experience to help plan survey routes for newer pilots and operations teams. When did he retire from the consulting? 9 months ago. His contract had ended, and he had not sought renewal because the company had restructured and the role had changed in ways that did not suit what he had to offer. What did a typical day look like now? He described it carefully. It was a description of a life with no specific shape, not unpleasant, not crisis. A collection of individual adequate days with no particular direction. I said, what does a day look like when things are going well for you? Not recently. At any point in your life when you have felt most like yourself. He did not hesitate. He described survey runs, the specific long-range solo flights, through Outer Belt corridors where the work was the complete engagement of everything he knew applied to a specific navigation problem with no certainty about the outcome and the full weight of consequence if he got it wrong. He described it with the particular aliveness that people have when they are describing the thing they are built for. Then he stopped describing it and the aliveness went somewhere. I sat with what I had just seen for a moment. I ran one more scan, not a biological scan. I asked him to describe the last time he had solved a problem that required everything he had. He thought for a long time. He said, 9 months ago. A routing problem for a survey team going into a debris-heavy corridor. He had spent 3 days on it, and the solution had required him to use 11 years of pattern recognition in combination with current geological data in a way he had not done before, and it had worked, and the survey team had come back clean. He said he had not had a problem like that since. I closed his file. I want to explain what I understood at that moment because it took me 3 more hours of research to be able to say it in language that was medically defensible, and it would be easy to skip to the conclusion without explaining what the conclusion was built from. Human beings have a category of physiological need that is not fully captured in the standard Outer Belt medical framework because the standard framework was developed primarily by Catherine and Valdorian medical researchers whose species did not share the specific characteristic I was looking at. The characteristic is this. Humans are a species that evolved under conditions of continuous high-consequence problem-solving, not abstract problem-solving. Survival problem-solving, where the failure mode was death, and the success required the complete integration of physical, cognitive, and emotional capacity, tie over extended periods. That evolutionary history did not disappear when the survival conditions changed. It became a physiological need, not metaphorically. Literally, human neurobiology is structured in a way that requires regular engagement with high-consequence, meaningful challenge to maintain the specific hormonal and neurological balance that the rest of the biological system depends on for optimal function. Remove the meaningful challenge and the biological system begins to optimize downward. Not immediately, not dramatically, in the specific gradual way that Leo Vasquez had been declining for 9 months. Vitals normal. Blood work unremarkable. Scans showing nothing, because nothing biological was wrong. The biology was responding correctly to the absence of the thing it was built to have. I went back to Leo Vasquez and explained this to him, not as a diagnosis of weakness, as a physiological fact about his species that had not been in his medical file because it was not yet in the standard medical framework, which was a gap in the framework, not a gap in him. He listened. He was quiet for a moment. He said, "You are telling me I am declining because I am not doing the work I am built to do." I said, "I am telling you that your neurobiology is structured around the kind of engagement your survey work provided and that the absence of that engagement has produced a measurable physiological response over 9 months." I said, "That is what the data says." He said the 3 previous physicians, I said, did not have the cross-species comparative framework that would have pointed them to this category of cause. I said, "It is not in the standard diagnostic protocol. It should be." He said, "What do I do?" I said, "Find the work," I said, "not exactly what you had. The work that requires everything you have applied to something with real stakes. The form matters less than the functio." And, he said, "I am 51 years old and 11 years out of active service." I said, "Your pattern recognition and your corridor knowledge are not 11 years old." I said, "They are current. You used them 3 days straight 9 months ago and produced a solution a newer pilot could not have found. That capability does not expire." He looked at me. He said, "You are a medical doctor prescribing me a job." I said, "I am a medical doctor identifying a physiological need and telling you what addresses it." I said, "What you do with that is yours." He sat with it. He said there was a coalition survey authority program, he said, mentorship and route planning for complex corridor operations. He had been asked twice to consider it and had declined because he had not seen the point. I said, "That sounds like a reasonable place to start." He said, "You think it will work?" I said, "I think your neurobiology will respond to meaningful high-consequence engagement the way it is designed to." I said, "I cannot guarantee outcomes. I can tell you what the mechanism is." He said, "How long?" I said, "The decline took 9 months," I said. "Recovery is not usually faster than the decline, but the trajectory should change relatively quickly once the engagement is consistent." He nodded once. He thanked me and left. I sat in the examination room for a while after he was gone and thought about 7 years of cases and the specific satisfaction of finding the thing that was causing a problem and being able to name it accurately. Then I opened a research file and started writing. The paper was titled Cross-Species Neurobiological Needs Assessment in Human Patients. A case for expanded diagnostic framework. Would you? And it was going to take 6 months to complete properly and was going to be long and carefully documented and was going to say something that the standard medical framework needed to hear. Leo Vasquez sent me a mess. Age 4 months later. It was brief. He said he had taken the coalition mentorship position 3 months ago. He said last week he had spent 4 days on a routing problem for a complex debris corridor and had found a solution that the survey team's navigation AI had not found. He said he felt like himself for the first time in over a year. I said I was glad. He said, "You should publish that paper." I said, "I am working on it." He said, "Work faster," he said. "There are probably more of us out there." I said, "I know." I went back to the paper and worked faster. He was right. There were more of them out there. Finding them required the framework. The framework needed building. I got back to work.